Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. My name is Peggy Ployer. I am the founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, as well as the host of this program, Empowering Homeschool Conversations. We're so excited that you're here with us this morning. I know I said this morning, this is not a typical time when we broadcast, and so I hope that some of you, just in your normal breakfast routine or getting ready, pop us on and join us for this conversation. This month of October here in 2022, we're talking about technology, and maybe not technology in the aspect that you're used to talking about technology in education. A lot of times we focus on tech being kind of the teacher of your student, where we know sometimes when you have a student that struggles, technology may be something that they love, but it may not be the best avenue to use in educating your students. So we want to just kind of cover some topics that'll help you learn how to use technology in just in a very thoughtful way, in using it in educating your student who has some unique learning needs, which is what we focus on here on this show. So just so you know that this broadcast is put on by SPED Homeschool, and it's sponsored by viewers like you. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation to SPED Homeschool, you can visit our website at spedhomeschool.com. And also know that on our website at SPED Homeschool, we're focusing on this topic as well as in our blogs. So those are also written by various experts, and we've got an expert here today to share with us live. And Rebecca Rolland, thank you so much for joining us this morning to talk about motivating our students using technology, and probably some ways that our parents aren't used to approaching this topic. So thank you so much for joining us.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I see viewers are already popping on. If you want to make comments, ask questions as we're going through this, just know that you can put your question, comments in the feed, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, and we'll respond to those as we're talking this morning. I know a lot of you are probably giving your kids breakfast, so just know that you can just put us on in the background too and listen live. We are so happy that you're joining us. Do know that if you make a comment in the Facebook group, that's our support group there on Facebook, that you have to give permission to StreamYard in order to publish your comment, because that is a private group that we run just for parents. So excited. Rebecca, I would love to just start this conversation by having you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and why you're just so passionate about motivating students, and a little bit about what got you started in doing the work that you do. And also you wrote a book. And so a little bit about that as well, and what motivated that project.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Rebecca Rolland, and I actually am the mom of two kids. So I have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old. So I'm right in the thick of it with everyone. And I'm also a speech language pathologist. So I work with kids who have any kind of communication difficulties, whether it's speech, but also trouble using language socially, trouble understanding what they read. So I do a lot of work with oral language, but also with writing and literacy. And I teach at the Harvard Grad School of Education, and I've also worked as a speech pathologist at Children's Hospital Boston. And there we really work to diagnose kids with learning disabilities. So I really have that whole clinical background, but also research. And yes, and I recently wrote a book kind of combining all of these things. It's partly a memoir of my own journey raising my kids, but also thinking about the research on how can we have conversations that are motivating to kids, that do help them learn and bond. So yeah, that's been where all that's come from.
That's awesome, because that learning and bonding, I don't think many people understand how important that is, that if you don't have that relationship, the learning doesn't translate as easily. And so I love that you talk about that. And we are going to talk about that a lot today. So if that intrigues you, definitely stay in tune, because this is we're not going to talk about technology as disintegrated, but as integrated into that relationship bond that is so important in learning. So I love that you touch on that. And yes, that's a great segue into some of the questions we're going to talk about. And so I would love for you just to start talking about motivation though first, because a lot of parents, we know they ask this all the time in our support groups, and when we get phone calls, is my child just doesn't want to learn. And
Mm-hmm.
so what is the basis a lot of times behind that dismotivation or the unmotivated students? Because a lot of times we've heard from experts, kids want to learn,
Yeah.
yet we see these kids that don't want to learn. And so
Mhm.
what's going on here?
Yes, definitely. And I've seen that a lot. So a lot of times I've seen kids after years of having trouble with motivation and feeling as if, oh, they're in sort of a
Mm-hmm.
cycle of not wanting to learn and then not
Yeah.
learning. And then it kind of creates more not wanting to learn.
Mm-mm.
So I think that that's one big thing is that if kids have experienced a lot of senses of failure or not mastering a subject or not being in control, a lot of times
Yeah.
it does create that cycle where they feel like,
Hmm.
oh, I can't do it. Why should I try? Or it's too easy, it's too hard, or I don't understand. So
Right.
starting to kind of pull back and see, well, what's behind that lack of motivation?
Mm.
And starting with
Hmm.
questions, I think is so important.
Yeah. So it's kind of a learned behavior. So
Exactly.
naturally, motivation should be something a child has that they want to learn, but it's yes, we.
Yeah, so we often think about it. There's a lot of research on the idea of mastery, and
Hmm.
competence. So if a child feels like, oh, I'm mastering something and I have
Hmm.
some kind of competence, it might not be total competence, but they're kind of
Hmm.
getting their way towards the goal, or they're learning, in a way that feels good, then they want to do
Right.
more of it. That's
Mm.
especially true with reading, I think. So a lot of times, kids who are having early success with reading, it's
Hmm.
exciting to them because they feel like, oh, now I'm reading more words, I understand more, I can kind of
Yeah.
progress. And if they're
Hmm.
not, if they're whatever for whatever reason, it can start
Hmm.
to feel demotivating. Like, oh, this is hard
Right.
and I'm not getting it. So especially for kids who are having those struggles, to sort of pick apart, well, where is that struggle coming from? And how can we
Hmm.
make changes, I think is so important to help them feel like, oh, I can master something and can have some success.
Right. So the motivation or the reward actually comes within the learning itself versus an external motivator that we have to add on. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, I often think about, helping children see their own progress as motivation
mm,
in itself. Like create, even if some kids benefit from like, a visual chart to say, well, you can make your goal and like let's see how far you can progress towards that. Because
right.
I do think giving kind of an external reward, it kind of actually can be counterproductive sometimes because it can
Huh.
feel like, oh, well, if I'm doing this, it must not be fun because why would I need a reward?
Right.
It's almost like if I have to eat my broccoli, then it's not good if I get ice cream afterwards because it's the broccoli must be bad. It's kind of the
Right.
same thing.
Well, and it's not a long lasting motivator either, because as we become adults, we don't have somebody to give us those prizes to
Exactly.
keep reading.
Mhm.
The reading itself should be what motivates us, and
Exactly.
or whatever else that we do. And so that's a really good point that we want to move towards that. If maybe if we're already in an external motivation setting with our child,
Yeah.
and then the underlying cause of what may be causing it is just they don't have the mastery or they don't have the precursor to what they need to be successful. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's some great points. Yeah, do you have something else to add to that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, I did also want to think about just opening up kind of the way sometimes the subject matter or the way kids are allowed to learn. So sometimes I've had
Mm,
kids, for example, where a parent or a teacher will say, "Oh, I don't want them reading graphic novels because oh, that's not there's not very much text. I'd rather that they read
hmm,
something with more text." But
right.
if that's what's engaging to the child at this moment,
Hmm,
especially if they are having some motivation trouble, I do think
right.
about kind of opening it up and saying, well, yeah, you could read about cars if you like cars, or read about
Hmm.
kind of really tailoring it to a child, I think is also key.
Yes, yes, go diving into those areas of interest. And we have such a freedom in homeschooling to do that. And
Exactly.
so embrace that, parents, that that can lead to some great motivation if you kind of let go.
Yes,
I know
exactly.
that's hard, um, but allowing your kids to just explore and use those skills that we want them to build on in a way that really is catered to their uniqueness. So yes, awesome. Love that. So children have a natural curiosity, and I know that it drives them to use a lot of technology, probably use a lot of technology better than we do. I know my daughter we were at the chiropractor and they had this brand new massage chair that my chiropractor said, well, why don't you go sit in the chair for 10 minutes while I adjust your mom. And my daughter's 18, but she just sent her off. She goes, you probably will figure out in less than a minute.
Exactly.
And so kids just gravitate towards these technology things and they just naturally get them. And so, we don't want to discourage that. So in that process, how do we integrate motivation in a way that we can engage some of these tech things into being motivators that move into what we were talking about earlier, was that intrinsic motivation.
Definitely. Yeah. So there's a couple of key things I think about. So I definitely agree that I don't like to consider technology as quote unquote bad or good. I think it's really all about how kids are using it and how we can help them learn and feel motivated through using it. So I think about two main things. One is just how active are they with the technology? So is it more? Yeah. So first is like, you're scrolling on TikTok or something. It'd be very passive. Versus, are you building something on Minecraft? Are you, really exploring that kind of thing? So that's kind of that moving kids towards more active uses, kind of nudging them in that direction. I think it's so important. And then the second is how interactive is it? So actually, are they collaborating with other people? Are they working with you and you're both on, playing a game together? Or with their friends or other kids in their group, or is it something that's very solitary that doesn't have that interactive component? So I think if you can move kids in both of those directions, it's a big start towards helping.
That's some great things to point out, because I don't think we often think about those things as we're thinking about education. We think about, just, what are the outcomes? What are, exactly. But that interaction, that back and forth is so important. And I mean, we know that, we remember things that we've had that have been in a relationship context. But yet we forget it very quickly when we think this technology is going to solve all our problems.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, we just tend to disassociate all of that, instead of saying, oh, this should make sense, that we need that interaction, that component to make it a long-lasting effect in teaching our students.
Yeah, I do see so much focus just on number hours of screen time, or how much is my child, how can I shut off technology, and I do think we can have sort of a more nuanced conversation.
Yeah, it brings up a really good point, is that technology used correctly shouldn't be something that we are trying. I mean, we don't get rid of technology just because it's bad. We don't add in just things that are non-tech because they're good. Non-tech things can be bad as well if we don't use them properly. So yeah, it's just all how we integrate that and use it. So now, how do we engage in that conversation, that relationship, instead of relying solely on tech to motivate the child? Do you have some ways that parents can kind of move even from things that they are using right now, to use it more effectively with that engagement aspect to it?
Definitely. Yeah. So I even think to take whatever kids are doing, say even today, and to think about well, what's a more interactive version of that would be one thing. So are they playing like a building video game? Is there a way they could play with friends, and they could all sit around and look at the same thing? Or are they, if they're doing something more learning oriented, obviously, are they reading a book, using something online? Could they do something where they respond online to a group of people having a discussion about that book? Or could they upload a book report and get feedback on it in that way? So always thinking about, well, how can we take what we're already doing and kind of explore how it could become more collaborative, how we could get feedback and see online as a community of people, rather than saying, okay, well, you're just going to do this thing online and then it's done. I do think a lot of kids love that sense of, they're actually sharing their work with people, especially people they don't know. So, could they make a blog about it, or could they, something like that is one way.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of that personalized version of social media.
Exactly.
We want to share, we want people to appreciate what we do. And so, yes, to find those avenues, those safe places, not just like publish them out on social media, but, within the context of those programs and those services to start cultivating that. And I think that makes I'm just in the back of my mind popped. That teaches them also how to be responsible in those sharing types of situations. And so you as a parent can come in and say, well, would you really want to say this? Do you really want people to read that? Let's edit this before we share it. And so that kind of moves us into, as a parent, what engagement, or how do we start building in the conversations and the questions that we can use with this technology that we're using to really help motivate our students to do even more?
Yes. And I think a lot of it is about just how to raise children's self-awareness about technology. So knowing that, whatever age they are, they're going towards more independence. So as they get older, we won't always be over their shoulder, looking at their, what they're looking at. So it's really important that we help raise their self-awareness. So as they become more independent, they're able to say, well, I'm going to make this choice because I can be critical about this, or I can notice what's working well for me and what's making me upset, or what seems to be safe and not safe. So I think having those kind of conversations, for example, asking a child, well, let's think about like what aspect of that project felt to you engaging? What was the most fun? Where did you feel like you wanted to share? Where did you feel uncomfortable? Where did it challenge you? What did you think we didn't go so well? Even those kind of evaluation type of questions could be really helpful.
Yeah, it's like the who, what, when, where, why, how.
Exactly.
I'm thinking, as the non-creative parent, what questions do I ask?
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing. I actually, in my book, I talk all about, I have all these sections of question starters and conversation starters and things. It's, if you want to go further into that. But for sure, there's a lot of questions about asking kind of what worked well for you, what didn't work well, what might we try the next time. So actually planning with your child, what can we do again in the future? And that really gives them more agency too, because it feels like, okay, well, I have a choice in what I'm doing. And we know that that's really key in motivation, is having students feel like, oh, I have some choice within bounds, but I'm allowed to actually kind of chart my own path too.
Right. Yeah. Let's dive into that choice just a bit with technology. Do you have any suggestions for parents, as far as, giving their students choice in those different, I guess, tech choice or technologies, and how to kind of go about that?
Yeah, so I definitely think that that students really do know a ton about technology already. So obviously, for the most part. So if they can actually, sometimes even I as a parent, will say, well, can you walk me through this? I'm not totally sure that I get all of this. You're playing this Roblox, or you're playing this thing, or doing this online. I'm not sure how I feel about it right now, because I don't actually know that much about it. So why don't you stay with me, walk me through it, Tell me why
Mm-hmm.
you like it, or what is going well for you in this. And then let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about like how this fits within your plans for education, or how this fits within your time, whether it's educational or whether it's something when you're doing on your own free time that's
Mm-hmm.
non-educational. It's still so important to have children feel like, okay, well, this parent is on my side. Like they want to
Yes.
understand. And I think if you can start from that perspective of, my parent is interested in what I'm doing and is not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
opposed just because it's technology. I think so many times
Right.
students will get that sense of, oh, well, my parent sees technology and they think, oh, no, you're not doing that. Um,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
which I understand. I feel like I've been
Mm-hmm.
there with the screen time. But I think if we can say, well, we do want to understand there is a difference between
Mm-hmm.
this thing and that thing,
Right.
and I think that also gives a child the chance to verbalize a lot and actually explain and teach, which is
Mm-hmm.
also really important for their language development. So it kind of goes
Oh,
works in a lot of
yeah.
different ways.
Yes, yes, exactly. And like I was talking about earlier, is they are just so much more in tune with how these things work. And yes, it's very easy for us to say, I don't know anything about that, so it just can't be good.
Right.
But being open to allowing them to teach you and show you, and then trying to figure out how can we make this work,
Yeah.
so that, because I mean, education is really a partnership with your child,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to empower them as much as possible to advocate for themselves. Basically, why do you want to use this technology? Well,
Exactly.
prove it to me.
Yeah. Exactly.
What a
Yeah.
great
Right.
skill.
Yes. Yeah. Being able to actually create that argument, I think
Hmm.
is amazing. So I think if children are able to do that and do that effectively, yes, it
Yeah.
builds their skills in so many different areas. So
Hmm.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've also, even when my kids have had different, we've needed technology, I've sent them out as they're older, and I know that they can go search the internet safely. Um, Find something that works, and
Mm-hmm.
I want you to research it, and then tell me why this is going to work for you versus
Mm-hmm.
all the other stuff you saw.
Right.
And so then they're learning research skills as well, and they're learning how to compare one technology to another.
Exactly.
And as technology changes all the time, that is such an important skill.
For sure. That's
Hmm.
great. And even thinking about sort of price and budgeting, like it has a lot you can
Yes.
do with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so true. Yes, and as they get older, even a lot of the high school type of materials, a lot of them are very tech integrated,
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
and so to have your student review that, is this something you would enjoy?
Right.
There's so much video, there's so
Right.
much
Exactly.
AI built in.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter hated AI.
Really? Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so we learn that, though, through the process of trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
But you just don't know, and then they know something more about themselves too that they can take into the work atmosphere, versus just saying, well, I just did what my mom told me,
Right.
and now I'm ready to launch into the world or go into college, and I have no idea. Well, college
Exactly.
tends to be
Exactly.
that way too, is you're given stuff by your professors and you don't really know. um, but if your child has that background of, oh, well, maybe I have to do a PowerPoint presentation, maybe I don't have to use PowerPoint, maybe
Right.
can use Canva, or
Right.
all
Yeah.
these other things that have these presentation things built into them.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's such a great point that really even the same technology won't work well for the same two people in a family. It's
Mm,
so personalized, and finding your style and kind of why something doesn't work. To say, well, is it AI? Is it
right.
because it was this reason or that reason? And actually trying to figure that out can be so
Mm-hmm.
helpful, because when there's obviously technology is always changing. So if a student gets to a new technology, they look over it and they say, oh, this might work for me because I liked this other thing that happened in the other technology. They're
Right.
able to start making those connections, or to say, oh, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that's going to work because I tried something like that and I really didn't like it. So to
Mm-hmm.
actually be able to be kind of self-aware can help save a ton of time in the future if they're wading through, tons and tons of options.
Right. Time and money as
And
well.
money.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then being the parent that then can walk them also through those questions. Because I think when they're younger, this would be a good thing to start working alongside your student and
Exactly.
asking those questions versus, just sending them out on their own and
Right.
saying,
Oh
okay,
yeah, for
just
sure. I think yes, you definitely need a lot of hand holding at the earlier
Mhm.
ages.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, yeah. And if you're watching live, I know we have some viewers, and just feel free to pop in your comments and your questions. We would love to include them in our conversation as well. Um, so, uh, talking about questions specific to motivation, how would a parent, work in conversations that would empower their student with technology?
Yeah, so I think it does really go back to that question of interest and sense of mastery and control. So first
Mm.
is, well, what kind of things are you drawn to that you think technology could help you explore?
Ah,
So, is
yes.
it, say they're really good at rock climbing and they think like, oh,
Mm.
we could do something with geography and figuring out, where are good
Mhm.
rock climbing locations across the
Oh,
United States,
yeah. Mhm.
or so start to use their interest as a jumping off point for kind of
Hmm.
these
Mhm.
technological journeys. Or if they're really
Right.
interested in graphic novels, like, well, let's see if we could research, are there any interactive graphic novels that you could,
Mm.
see
Mhm.
online, or do you want to create one, and how would you go about doing that?
Oh,
That
yeah.
kind of thing. So really moving towards thinking of kids less as sort of passive recipients, but really as active creators as much as possible.
Mm.
So we
Mhm.
see like, oh, you're able to take what you learn and then apply it in some more extension or some way that actually does support your learning and application of the skills. And oftentimes that can
Right.
be technology, even if the initial thing wasn't technology. So kind of using technology as a fun way to extend
Mm.
what children are already doing, that can be a really great way to move forward.
Yeah, I love that because, yes, we it's often so separate, like this is school.
Exactly. Yes,
This is
exactly.
what you're interested in, or this is technology, which is usually gaming,
Hmm.
at least in my house.
Yes.
And then there's whatever you have to find so you can find
Mhm.
it, but let's mesh all this together, and as a parent I can come in and coach you and really show you how to weave this together.
Yes,
um,
yes. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think recognizing that that will benefit probably their education side, but even benefit them deepening their interests. So kind of, then they learn more about, rock
Right.
climbing, and they want to do something else. So it kind of really does go both
Hmm.
ways.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Um, such good things. So, anything else as far as the integration that you want to talk about?
I guess I would just say one thing to think about is just not to, even as we talk about being open to technology, to
Hmm.
recognize when it is distracting. So I do think,
Oh,
as
yes.
I've seen kids even with, who might have dyslexia, who are reading text that has lots of links on it. It says like,
Mm,
here, click if you want to understand this word, or click if and there's a lot of research showing that that can be really helpful for certain
mm,
kids in certain times, but it can
mm.
also be overwhelming and kind of overstimulating if the
Yeah.
child is like clicking on the link every time, because then they're
Hmm.
being led off into maybe sometimes a rabbit hole of here's this link and
Right.
here's this link. So just to be mindful of that and kind of know that, is
Hmm.
this helping learning, or is this kind of creating another situation where they're inattentive or feel unmotivated? That would be my
Right.
main takeaway, is just to always kind of be checking in with the student.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many times we think, oh, this is a great add-on, and I've never even thought about that. As yes, sometimes those great things can be too much.
Exactly.
And yes, and especially with reading comprehension, the last thing you want is to be going all over the
Right.
place, because the last thing you're going to do is create that picture in your mind. You're going to be yeah, creating
Exactly.
all these sub
Yeah, right.
pictures
Yes.
at the same time.
Yeah.
So yes, so yes, those are some that's some great points. And I think technology, in a way, can be sometimes overly useful. Like we find that those spell checks now that just
Mm.
instantly correct your spelling before you even see the word, is not helpful in teaching your child how to spell.
Exactly. And even to recognize which one is spelled right. So sometimes kids will not even know which one's spelled right. So they have these wrong words or just,
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So yes, technology has gotten so good that it can sometimes be too good to help with the learning process. It's great as an assistive thing for the necessary us adults that don't spell correctly.
Everything in moderation, I would say.
Yeah, so true. But all right. Well, we had one person at the very beginning say, great point. I'm not exactly sure what that was for, but I'm glad that something that we said really rang true for you. And we had somebody on YouTube ask if we could add subtitles. The subtitles will be added after as a recording. I'm sorry, we don't do those live. I've been looking into ways we could get a transcript added instantly. It's just this particular program that I use, StreamYard, doesn't do that. I've been begging them. So yes, you'll have to wait for the subtitles on either Facebook or YouTube after the recording's done. So that's done. But hopefully soon we'll be having transcripts come out with the recorded version as well very soon, because I know a lot of you have been asking about that. And so just answers to a couple of those questions we have. If you have anything else you'd like to add, please make a comment in the feed on Facebook or YouTube, and we'd love to get to those. Do you have a student that is addicted to technology? How do we get them off of there? Maybe that's a good question that we can talk a little bit about. How do we kind of transition to that addiction to the usefulness of technology?
Definitely. So I do think it really all comes back to that question of self-awareness, and it can be hard if a child is really addicted and feels like, oh, I need this, or I can't get off of it. Because we know there's a physical side too, where it actually can feel addicting. They are having that surges of dopamine and things when they're feeling like, oh, this feels really good. So it makes sense that it's going to be hard for them to actually get off of it. You can't really just say, okay, well, let's stop. And, so I think to teach kids to think about, well, what isn't getting done? Let's actually look at the other things. So sometimes rather than focusing on, well, let's look at how many hours you're on technology and talk about that. It can be more effective to actually turn your attention towards all of the other things that need to happen and kind of focus a little bit gently on, well, let's move towards getting those things done or doing more of those things, and kind of not so much talking about the technology at first. And then checking in with a child, like, well, how are you feeling about it? Like, what do you feel when you're staring at the screen for 10 hours? How does your body feel? Like, even actually having those kind of conversations to help kids feel like, oh, I'm starting to notice signs when I'm getting fatigued, or my eyes are getting blurry, or that kind of thing. That can also help when we're thinking about sort of health and children's well-being, and to say, it doesn't actually feel good when you're on technology for that long. Those are two kind of ways to start with that, but it's definitely a process. So I wouldn't say it's a single fix, because it involves conversations.
Exactly. And of any type of addiction or just a bad habit, it does take time. And so it's a good reminder for us as parents that this is just not an overnight thing where we can just say, yes, my child's just going to get off of this, we're going to be done. Because yes, they need to learn the process of how to change and move towards better inputs and use of their time. And like you said, Rebecca, just being able to say, what aren't we doing? How are you feeling? And for them to notice that, because as adults, we spend a lot of time on technology too, and we need to have those skills as adults, and to train our children. This is when you should get up and take a break, not just when your watch goes off and says you've been sitting for too long. You should just intrinsically know, I need to get up and walk around. I've been sitting too long. My eyes are starting to glaze over, and not being productive at all. Sitting here. So great topics of conversation for sure. So yeah, we've covered a lot of points. We've talked about just that the use of technology and helping our students to realize different ways that they can advocate for using technology, but integrating us into that conversation about the technology and maybe some tough points with addictions to screens and other things. And so we've covered a lot of topics. Is there anything else that is coming to mind that you'd really like our viewers to know?
I guess I would say just now, after 2 years of kids using a lot of screens, I think a lot of people have developed, habits where they didn't necessarily have them before.
Oh, yes.
So I think it can be a helpful time just to kind of take a reset and to say, oh, well, let's look at kind of like a technology, sort of assessment.
Yeah.
Like not just for the kids, but even for us, like how are we using technology, and what habits have we maybe gotten into that we'd like to change? And having that be kind of a family conversation can be really helpful too.
That's
maybe it's
a great idea.
Just sort of thinking, have we all started using our phones at the table, for example, when we want to do that, or all start, that kind of thing, just to sort of notice and say, like, let's maybe set some things if we want to change. It can be a really good time, just because it's natural that after so much isolation and so much, there's been a lot sort of increase and creep up of those things.
Yeah, so much so since COVID. I know it is good to take those assessments, and I think on a regular basis, things just creep in anyways. And so maybe to have a certain time set in your calendar, every couple months, or where are we at? Or have we allowed this to creep back in? And let's just doing a family assessment. I love that. That's definitely, it can be added to my list.
I know.
Even with adult children, it just happens.
Yeah, it does happen. You don't know until it's
life just goes, and you're like, oh man, you get so busy and everybody's schedules, and it's like, let's all reconnect. But you have to be purposeful in those things, because if we're not, we can easily slide. And the way everything is just going towards more and more usage of technology, and we're spending time together, but we're not talking to each other. We're not even looking at one another.
Exactly.
And I think also, if we're modeling for our children, this is what we need to do. This is what makes sure we do what's most important, instead of, well, we're just going to slide with everybody else.
Exactly. Yes. And I think that is so true, to think about just your own values, what's working for you as a family, and realizing, like, well, if that works for this other family, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for our family, to think about how does actually, how can we make this useful for us and actually fun and, part of our family life, without feeling like, oh, this is, we have to be doing this because everybody else is texting at 10 o'clock, or everybody else is, whatever else.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so if you need to set those boundaries firm. Let your children see you setting those boundaries, because then they're more likely to see that they're valued, and they'll follow in doing that too, and that it's important to you, and it'll become important to them. So, well, this has been such a great conversation, Rebecca. I would love for you to talk a little bit about your resources and your book, and I'm going to put your website up. But for those people that are listening on our podcast, Rebecca's website is RebeccaRolland.com. It's RebeccaRolland.com.
Definitely. Yeah. So on my website, I have a free newsletter where you can get different tips, points, and ask questions, and I can respond to. You can also find the link to my book. So I actually wrote a book recently called The Art of Talking with Children. And it does talk about technology use and a lot about motivation. So if you're interested in more of those topics, or even just the conversation starters and things like that, there's a large appendix that goes by ages and stages. So
that's really awesome.
Helpful. Yeah. So if you're thinking, well, how do I talk to a 2-year-old versus a 15-year-old?
Yes, that's a very different conversation.
Exactly.
At least you would hope so.
You would hope so. Yes. You were definitely not going to be using the same words, hopefully. So I talk a lot about that, and that's available either through Amazon, through my website, or on HarperCollins, where it was published.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I appreciate all your insight in this, and it has definitely taken a different route than a typical conversation about educational technology. But it's what we really wanted to focus on this month, is that technology has a use, but we have to be very mindful of those usages and how we integrate that in. So thank you for just sharing your wisdom in this area and giving our parents just some tools to be able to use.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you all for joining us too on this broadcast. Again, this broadcast was sponsored by viewers like you. If you'd like to make a donation to SPED Homeschool, is tax deductible. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can visit our website at spedhomeschool.com to do that. And we're going to continue this conversation this month about technology. Next week, though, we're not going to be talking about using technology with your kids. We're going to be talking about tech for you. Our conversation next week is about using technology to showcase your students' learning and basically creating portfolios of your students' work using tech instead of big folders and boxes that you have no place to store in your home. And like when I got to the end of my homeschooling, went, what do I do with all these things? It's nice to have some of it, but when you've got just boxes and boxes from 19 years of homeschooling and moving, it doesn't make sense. So our guest next week is going to talk about how to use tech to really showcase what's most important, to keep those memorable things and not let it take up all this space in your house. So very useful technology. Absolutely. So you'll want to join us for that. And we'll be back again at our regular time, 12:30 Central on Tuesday afternoon, again for that broadcast. So you'll want to join us then. Thank you again, Rebecca. Thank you for the work that you do and for all that you do to just pour into families and children and educators and into the science of education. I appreciate you and the work that you do.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and thanks to everyone listening.
Yes. Thank you for our viewers. We appreciate you a lot. And we are thankful that you are part of our community. And so we'll definitely see you again next week. And until then, take care and God bless. And have a great week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.